In this episode of Watching the Watchers, we're talking about Kyle Rittenhouse, day 2. We've got a lot to get into. We've got opening arguments from both the prosecution and the defense, and then we had our first witness, Dominic Black. And so we got to hear the prosecution actually direct exam of Dominic Black, which sort of felt like it was almost a defense witness. So very interesting there. A lot of helpful information came out from the prosecution's witness, and the defense cross-examined Dominic Black, and so we're going to break that down as well. We've got a lot to get into. It is Tuesday, so of course this is a little bit of a shorter show, and so we're going to limit it to the one segment so that we can really go deep on day 2 of Kyle Rittenhouse. So if you want to be a part of the show, the place to do that is over at watchingthewatchers.locals.com. We record this program every day, 4 p.m. Arizona time, 7 p.m. Eastern time, and I know that's going to change very soon, so I'm going to have to relearn my dates here, or my time zones. But if you want to be a part of the show when we are recording, you can do that by going over to watchingthewatchers.locals.com. There is a form here, looks just like this. Ask your questions, and we'll make sure that we can do our very best to get to them. If you can keep them in order as we're going throughout the segments, of course, there's only one today. That's always helpful. If you're looking for clips of the show, our segments, each one of them are clipped, and they're put over here at Robert Gruller ESQ Clips, where if you want to just go and share the individual segments, the individual stories that we talk about, that's the YouTube channel that you can use, and it's very appreciated if you do share, subscribe, leave a comment. Just help us sort of, spread the show around, because YouTube has us in this little bit of a force field. It's getting frustrating, but that's okay. It's their playground. We're just playing ball. All right, so let's go ahead and get into the actual news of the day. Kyle Rittenhouse trial, day 2. We've got a lot to break down. We've got opening arguments from both the prosecution. We have Thomas Binger, who is representing the government in the case. You can see him here on our trial board. We're going to hear from him today. Thomas Binger up here in the top left. We also heard today from Mark Richards. Mark Richards was responsible for giving the defense opening statement. And so we've had a couple different appearances from a couple different people. Today we also heard a little bit from James Krause, or he goes by Jim, nice guy. And he is somebody who was just kind of chiming in on objections, more of the technical aspects of the case. But that's really what we heard from. We also, of course, heard from Judge Bruce Schroeder today, and we also heard from a witness. And so we're going to take a look at who that witness was, Dominic Black. But for the rest of the segment today, this is what the board looks like. Not a lot of activity from Corey Chirafisi today. Didn't hear from any of the other individuals who are a part of the prosecution team. And so we'll take a quick look at the charges. Of course, none of these really came up today. We talked a little bit about jury instructions at the very start of trial today. There was some technical conversations being had about whether self-defense was going to be part of the jury instructions, and people are sort of reading this a number of different ways. I think that's fair. This judge, as I've been saying here, is very organic. He kind of does things loosely. And so even this morning, he was sort of, floundering around about what the jury instructions should be for counts 5 and 6, for the attempted intentional homicide as to Gage Grosskretz, and the possession of a weapons charge. And so you're just like, it's a little bit frustrating that we're not getting more clarity, but the judge is sort of saying, I'm going to give curative instructions if this progresses to the point where we need to make some changes. In other words, I'm just going to give the jury enough jury instructions about what's in the information that they know there's a weapon involved, but I'm not going to give them the details about the self-defense specifics until we get closer to deliberation time. So I know it's frustrating, but it's just how this judge runs his courtroom. So it is what it is. We also are going to see that we are learning a little bit more about the people who are part of sort of the Kyle Rittenhouse crew, if you want to call him that. We have Dominic Black. He was the government's first witness, and so this is the government's team. We got James Krause, of course, Gage Grosskretz, the assailant or the victim, depending on how you want to label him. And then the other individuals, Huber, Rosenbaum, McGinnis, and an unknown person, that we're sort of fleshing out their expert witnesses and their regular witnesses. Today was Dominic Black, somebody who is a part of the Rittenhouse crew. We're going to hear from him as this segment unfolds. We also learned about this other guy. Don't have a picture of him. This was Nick Smith, somebody else who was a part of the Rittenhouse crew. And so We've got a ton of segments here, a ton of clips. I really could not stop clipping as I was watching today, and we're going to get into all of it. Before we jump into the opening statements, though, I want to do a quick benchmark. I want to set a rubric. I want to maybe have some guidelines that we can use to analyze these opening statements, because everybody wants to know, well, who had a better opening statement? Who was more persuasive? Who is going to be more compelling in front of the jurors? And it's always good to have a standard against which we can compare these things. And so I want to share with you a book that I keep handy for all the things that we do here. It's called Turning Points at Trial: Great Lawyers Share Secrets, Strategies, and Skills, written by this guy, Shane Reed. And it's sort of a compendium. It's a summation of a bunch of different stories from very famous lawyers and how they do things, and how, other lawyers who are, not very famous, not very accomplished, can emulate them, learn some of their strategies and their skills to be effective. And so we're talking about opening statements. Who out there gives amazing opening statements? This guy. And he's referenced in this book. His name is Mark Lanier. He's an American trial lawyer, has represented major wins against some of the major drug companies. So here you can see Johnson & Johnson, Merck & Co., and Vioxx. So he got a breach of contract lawsuit, won $480 million jury verdict, right? $480 million. Here against Johnson & Johnson, $550 million compensatory damage plus $4.14 billion in punitive damages. Okay, billion in punitive, which is a lot. Okay, that means that this jury was pissed about whatever they heard from him. So that means that Mark Lanier can come out there and really sell a whopper of a story, right? Just really get people riled up, fired up out there. This jury was so mad after this Johnson & Johnson talc litigation that they said, oh, yeah, you get $550 million just to compensate the victims, and we're going to give you another $4 billion in punitive damages. That's how mad we are. So, right, somebody who can really just deliver home an opening statement. Also, one looks like $253 million against Vioxx, Merck & Co., Vioxx, right? So somebody who can really deliver opening statements. So what does he say about this? And we're going to watch two opening statements, one given by the prosecutor in this case, Thomas Binger, one given by Mark Richards, the defense attorney representing Kyle Rittenhouse. But let's just take a quick look at the rubrics. How do we sort of compare them to this standard that is from Mark Lanier, somebody who's won billions of dollars, literally, in jury verdicts? So what we have here, he says, long before the trial begins, we have to think about a theme in the form of a story, a TV show, or a movie that applies to your case, which is always good advice, talking about that heroic journey, talking about sort of the Luke Skywalker story. Somebody, is a novice who sort of learns a little bit about how to improve their skill sets and then has this catastrophic fall, but then comes back with a vengeance, right, and is the hero of the story, right? These are themes that human beings resonate with. That's why all the stories follow that similar arc. And so if something like that is useful. Also, look for ways to change bad facts into good facts. You're going to see this out of Mark Richards. You're going to see this attempted out of Thomas Binger. Also talking about not overselling your case, right? Don't promise anything that you can't actually deliver. If you do, you're going to really hurt your credibility, which is point 4. Your cover story needs to be the good, the bad, and the ugly. You got to talk about the bad facts in the case. Even in the run-of-the-mill case, you need to make the case personal for the jury. Make it personal. Explain to them why it's important. Don't use notes. You see this? Instead, speak from the heart, but also use PowerPoint slides to communicate your story to the jury, which was a surprise to me, right? PowerPoints. Wow. A lot of people hate PowerPoints. I happen to think they're pretty dang great. Happen to use them for the show, as you can see here. This is a PowerPoint slide. But he says use them, and use words the jurors will understand. And so you can take a quick look at those as different thresholds. He gives us a couple other points. Speak in gloriously plain English. Accompany every point with imaginative, easily understood visual aids. Entertain the jury. Tell the jury that you're going to make their job easy and empower the jury, okay? And this guy is talking about this in the context of legal cases, but this is applicable to life, right? All of these skill sets are very applicable everywhere you go. Okay, so now that we have a standard in place, enough with all of the lecturing, let's get into the content. What happened today in court Our first clip is from Thomas Binger, and this is his immediate opening statement. So our first minute is from Thomas Binger. This is the judge says, okay, everybody's in seated, comfy jurors. Anybody have to use the bathroom before we get going? You know how Dad hates to stop and pull over. So make sure that you're situated and comfortable, right? Okay, Thomas Binger, your table. Here you go. Here he is.
Thank you, Judge. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. The evidence in this case will show that on the night of August 25th, 2020, here in our community of Kenosha, the defendant Kyle Rittenhouse, who was 17 years old at the time, had armed himself with an AR-15 style semi-automatic rifle loaded with 30 rounds in the magazine. And using that rifle, he shot and killed Joseph Rosenbaum, an unarmed man. The shot that killed Mr. Rosenbaum was a shot to the back. This occurred after the defendant chased down Mr. Rosenbaum and confronted him while wielding that AR-15.
Wow, that's new.
The evidence will show that the defendant fled the scene of the dead body of Joseph Rosenbaum without stopping to offer any aid whatsoever.
All right, so kind of the standard stuff, right? Laying out the facts of the case, and not even that creative, right? Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the evidence will show. And if you go to a trial college, they'll tell you that's exactly what not to do. But every lawyer does it because that's what they teach you in law school. The evidence is going to show. Okay, just get into it, right? Talk about your theme, talk about your narrative, but he starts this the same way every prosecutor starts. And I think prosecutors go to a different school. It's just sort of it's paint by numbers, more or less, and no disrespect to prosecutors, but they have a standard formula that they have to follow, and defense attorneys theoretically have to be a little bit more creative, right? The government has a list of elements that they need to prove beyond a reasonable doubt in a prosecution. They have to hit it. Defense has to be creative, and so you have a little bit more creative leeway when you are concocting these statements. So yes, prosecutors naturally will be a little bit more bland, but he did say something that I think a lot of people had overlooked, right? The idea here being that Kyle Rittenhouse was ultimately the provocateur in the whole situation. We're going to hear, I think, that there's FBI video that is apparently surveillance footage that might show infrared camera footage of Rittenhouse running down the street, allegedly chasing Rosenbaum. And so that's sort of what he's hinting at. But the idea is that Rittenhouse was the provocateur and he started the whole thing. And if you do that, it's really difficult to turn around and claim self-defense. So Binger comes out, he shot Rosenbaum and didn't stop and help him at all. Like sort of expecting that maybe if a police officer did that, right, a police officer would shoot somebody and then go and render immediate aid. And he did not do that in this case. And why didn't he do that? Well, because he's a cold-blooded killer, according to this prosecutor. Binger is saying, he's a cold-hearted, dangerous murderer that just executed somebody and didn't even stop to help, not even for a minute. And so that's kind of the narrative that he is crafting. Here he walks through, and I got to be honest, I actually liked his opening statement more or less. I think that on the totality of everything, he did a fine job. And we're going to go through it. He goes through and outlines sort of this really visual narrative of all the different other individuals involved in the case. You can choose how to identify them, right? The victims, if you're a prosecutor, so we'll use his language. He's presenting Gage Grosskreutz, right? He talks about him in this clip. But preceding, he talked about Anthony Huber being shot in the chest. He talked about who was the other? Oh, Rosenbaum, who was shot and killed. Talks about McGinnis, sort of, bullets whizzing by. And now he's talking about Gage Grosskreutz. And watch how he presents this, right? It actually is a little bit persuasive. He's getting sort of visual with this. He's not standing behind a podium just reading from a list of notes, which would be problematic, but he's sort of moving around and he's getting animated. And that's good. That's good trial practice because jurors are already falling asleep at this moment in the case. So let's take a look at Thomas Binger talking about Gage Grosskreutz, talking about the cell phone, and acknowledging that he had a Glock. Okay, so this is something that's very interesting. We're noticing now in a case that involves self-defense that one of the victims, if you're a prosecutor, right, we're using their language. This is Thomas Binger's case. It's his victim he's talking about. And his victim had a Glock in his hand when he got shot. And he's just admitting this, right, to the jury, because it's true. It's a fact. So he has to acknowledge it. This is part of the thing that you have to talk about. The prosecutor has the case that he has, and he's got to get these facts out. And so he's doing it, and this is how he's doing it. Here is Binger.
A final individual by the name of Gage Grosskreutz has followed this chase on foot and has approached the defendant at this time. Mr. Grosskreutz is holding his cell phone that he'd been using to record the night's events for a live stream on Facebook in one hand, and a Glock semi-automatic pistol in the other hand. He runs up to the defendant. The defendant turns towards him with the AR-15. Mr. Grosskreutz raises his hand. The defendant then turns his rifle over, begins to examine it for a second. Mr. Grosskreutz takes this opportunity, and you will see in the photos and the videos that he blades his body with his left hand, reaching towards the defendant. His right arm is pulled back. This is the one with the gun in his hand. And as he's reaching for the defendant turns the AR-15 and discharges the 8th and final round into Mr. Grosskreitz's right arm, the arm with the gun. Mr. Grosskreutz runs off, screaming for a medic. The defendant gets up and walks away.
All right. Did you see what he did there? Very clever, very interesting. So he's got a bad fact in his case. He's got this victim, according to him, that has a gun who is basically running towards Kyle Rittenhouse. And so what does he need to do is he's got to show is that Kyle Rittenhouse wasn't acting out of self-defense. In fact, this was something where Gage Grosskreutz was already disengaging to some degree, and Rittenhouse, as the prosecutor showed us, went through this very long and twisted, just sort of looking at the gun, examining it, reading about it. Oh, I wonder what, I don't like this story. Swiped left on the story of the gun. Oh, that's swipe left on that. I'll take that one. Very long, drawn out process, and then flipped it back over and bladed his body and did all of this stuff, and then just decided, since Kyle Rittenhouse had so much time on his hand, I don't like Gage Grosskreutz over there, and so I'm just going to attempt to execute this person also, and then shot him anyways. Right? And so really drawing this long sequence out when in reality, it didn't happen that way. It was a lot more expedited of a process. It happened very quickly, and it was something that the defense is going to come back out and reframe as something that happened very quickly. Rittenhouse was in fear of his life. He was sort of acting instinctually, and as soon as that shot went off, everybody else basically stopped, and the scene was over at that moment. So it was an interesting way to deal with a bad fact. This Glock is coming in. He is getting animated, which I thought was very excellent, and it was a good way to bring the jury back in, right? Pull them into the situation rather than just reading about it. So that was good. We also have some more good, and then we have a little bit of bad here. So I want to sort of break this up. I think I've got it in 2 clips. We're going to give I'm trying to give equal time to both sides. So here is Binger, and here he's talking about something that is very good, a concept that we've talked about a lot here on this channel, the distinction between human life and property, and that we value human life over property, and that when we have situations where, like we were talking about in the Ahmaud Arbery case, right, you have a situation where you don't get just to get to go chase people down and shoot them because they stole something and they're running out of your house, right? It has to be about an actual threat to human life. We've talked about the examples of the spring guns, the trap guns that people used to set in their old homes, back when in the wild West, so that looters wouldn't break into their property and ransack their property. They would just set a gun open. When the door opened, the gun would go off and just shotgun the person right out the front door. Can't do that because that is something that is protecting property, and we value human life over property. And so that same concept that we've talked a lot about here, that is sort of an instinctual thing, I think a lot of people just recognize that, is being drawn out here by Thomas Binger. He gives us a very good line and uses his hands to show us jurors, this is how we're going to be able to delineate and balance these things out in the near future. And also pay close attention to how Binger is using the us versus them narrative that you see, sort of making this tribal argument. We are here in Kenosha. This is our community. Kyle Rittenhouse is not a part of that. Listen to him here.
Car Source, one of their locations on Sheridan, and other properties around town, that were damaged. Fortunately, in the entire sequence of events, this was all property damage. And one of the things we all agreed on yesterday is life is more important than property. Up until Tuesday night, despite all the things that the community had experienced, no one had been killed. But what happened as the time went on was that the people of Kenosha, who felt a sense of outrage, began to protest. But like moths to a flame, tourists from outside of our community were drawn to the chaos here in Kenosha.
Tourists.
People from outside of Kenosha came in and contributed to that chaos. And it caused many of our citizens to fear for their safety. Fear for their homes and their families. Fear for their business.
Okay, so I think I broke this up into two clips, but we'll make the point right here. So he is saying, I think the us versus them is always useful, can be useful if it's a situation like this, right? You've got a lot of people who are traumatized by all of the looting that went on out there. And so you've got a demographic that might actually be sympathetic to Rittenhouse, right? He's somebody who was there to stop all of that. These people are, presumably your everyday citizens who are part of the community. These are people who are not out there burning their own businesses down. They are the people going to work, going to school, raising families that are just everyday jurors, just like you or I would be. And so they were looking around at a lot of this looting, a lot of this trauma that was taking place in their own neighborhoods. And they were saying, yeah, finally somebody actually did stand up and do something about this. And so maybe they are a little bit sympathetic to Kyle Rittenhouse. Who knows? But Binger comes out and now he's making it an us versus them, right? Rittenhouse was somebody who was actually contributing to the unrest. There was a reason why people were upset about this, but now we have these tourists, people who are not even from Kenosha, driving on in here to instigate the situation, inflame it all, make it worse. He wasn't here to solve the problem. Don't be sympathetic to Rittenhouse for stopping the people who are burning your neighborhoods down. He was not doing that at all. In fact, he was here contributing to the disorder. And in addition to that, he murdered our own citizens, people who were a part of Kenosha. He just executed them and didn't even stop to give them any support. And so he's trying to reframe this in a way that I think is quite good, but he's logically conflating another issue that I think is going to outshine that underlying issue of this outsider narrative. It's the causing fear for your safety, which is the bigger issue that we're talking about here. And he just jumped into that. He said all the people in this neighborhood, in our community that Kyle Rittenhouse is not a part of, were very scared. People were fearing for their safety. They were watching all of this trauma unfold all around them, and it was dangerous. It was, in fact, violent, which is going to justify Rittenhouse using force to protect himself because he was right in the middle of a violent encounter. Now, his response to that is that Kyle Rittenhouse shouldn't have been there anyways, but that's not it's not, I think, the argument that wins the day, because he was there, and there's going to be a lot of narrative sort of about that, about whether he should have been there, and we're going to see this when we get into our first witness, Dominic, here in a minute. But it's trying to sort of mash two components of the timeline into one, and I don't think it's a winning argument. You're going to hear from Binger. I think I have it right here. This is part 2, saying that the people who were in Kenosha, in that community that Kyle Rittenhouse is not a part of, were in fact very scared, and that the actions that they were taking to protect themselves were entirely reasonable. But you're going to see somehow Rittenhouse taking actions to protect himself were not entirely reasonable. Here is Binger again.
And their families, fear for their businesses, and take steps to protect themselves, whether it is to arm themselves, board up their windows, move, or take time away from the community. All of those reactions were entirely understandable and reasonable.
What?
And no one here is going to tell you otherwise.
Okay.
As long as those are what you're left doing, there's no issue. But out of the hundreds of people that came to Kenosha during that week, the hundreds of people that were out on the streets that week, the evidence will show that the only person who killed anyone was the defendant Kyle Rittenhouse.
Yeah, I mean, he wasn't at a shooting war zone, right? It was an isolated case. And so just because it's like the prosecutor's argument is that if more people would have been shooting other people, well, then Kyle's actions would have been approved. But he was the only one that shot somebody, so he's this aberration. Well, I mean, as we're going to see from the defense attorney here, there might be a good reason for that. But let's take a quick look at the scoreboard. What do we see? What do we think about here from Binger? Did he hit the scoreboard, hit the rubrics? Don't oversell your case. Look for ways to change bad facts into good. I think he did that. I didn't see a real theme of his narrative. He kind of jumped right into it. The evidence will show. Entertaining a little bit. Got some movement in there. Speaking gloriously plain English. I think that was pretty good. No visual aids that we saw other than the use of his body. Looks like he was using notes. No PowerPoint slides, though, so he fails on that one. Anything else? No. All right. So we've got that. So that was Thomas Binger, according to Mark Lanier's scoreboard. And then we're going to see that the defense now takes over. So they come out and they give their opening statement. Here is Mark Richards. Today in court, Rittenhouse, day 2 of the trial.
Good morning still for the next 10 minutes.
Here's Kyle.
This is my opportunity to tell you and show you what I believe the evidence will show. You've heard the state's opening statement, and now I will give mine. We have two very different outlooks on the events of August 25th of 2020. Kyle Rittenhouse was present in Kenosha, Wisconsin on the evening of August 24th. He stayed at his friend's residence, Dominic Black. He saw on the live streams and things like that the events of the 24th. He saw car source number 1, as I refer to it, the one that's on the east side of Sheridan Road, burn. All of the automobiles burned, destroyed. He saw the looting going on. He saw the other businesses burnt down. And the next morning, he went down to downtown Kenosha to look at the damage. He stopped and he helped clean up at the old Ruther High School. I think it's called something else now, but when I was around here, it was called Ruther, and before that, Bradford. And he saw that. He met one of the owners from CarSource, and they talked, and they decided that they would offer their services, him and Dominic Black and Nick Smith, to help protect the property of CarSource.
Okay, so I wanted to let that play out a little bit so you can just see kind of the difference. We played the very opening minute of Thomas Binger. We played the very opening minute of defense attorney Mark Richards, and you can see a very clear difference. Binger comes out and says, the evidence will show, and jumps right into the bullet points. And as I mentioned, prosecution, the government, they have to do that. They've got statutes that they need to hit, and they sort of just, it's kind of a paint by numbers thing. Put green in block number 1, red in block number 2, and so on. So that was his story. He walks us through victim number 1 sounds like this. Victim number 2, this is what happened to him. Victim number 3, and so on down the list. Mark Richards comes out and tells a story. And it sort of feels like, what is he doing? What is he even talking about out here? Comes out, and he actually is humanizing it. I call it number 1. It's right across the street from 59th. That's where we go over there, to get our car parts figured out, whatever. Kind of this sort of personal narrative, just meandering through telling a story. What's the story about? It's about protection. It's about Kyle Rittenhouse being in a house with his friend Dominic, somebody who we're going to hear from is like a brother to Kyle. They're sitting around watching these live streams of Kenosha burning to the ground, and they're a short stone's throw away, and so they decide that they're just going to head on over there. And that's what Mark Richards continues. He tells us the rest of the story and says specifically that Kyle isn't an outsider. Thomas Binger just said that this was our community, and these outsiders, these tourists came in here to wreck this place. And what Mark Richards does, nope, that's not the case at all. In fact, Kyle's a part of this community. His mom's a part of this community. His dad grew up here. Here is Mark Richards rebutting that point today.
Ladies and gentlemen, the evidence will show, in spite of what the media and public statements and things like that have been, the evidence will show that Kyle Rittenhouse had strong ties to Kenosha. His father lived in Kenosha. His mother lived in Antioch, Illinois. Kyle worked here in Kenosha County at the Recplex in Pleasant Prairie as a lifeguard.
So he's been around. He's not an outsider. He was coming back not because he wanted to stir the pot. He was coming back to protect the community, something that his family has a very strong part of, where he was a lifeguard, for crying out loud. So, don't buy the narrative that the prosecution is proffering forward. There's a whole different story here. And what he said, if you recall, on the very last segment, the very last clip that we had of Thomas Binger, the prosecutor, he was doing this thing. He said, the only person out there who shot anybody, Kyle Rittenhouse. There was a lot of other people out there protesting, a lot of other people with guns, a lot of other people out there causing a ruckus, but the only person who shot anybody was that person right there, Kyle Rittenhouse. And he said it multiple times. If you watch the full hearing, Kyle Rittenhouse did it, and Kyle Rittenhouse did it. It was his Tom Cruise moment, and it was a big debut. And then Mark Richards comes out and says, yeah, that's true. It is true. He is the only person who shot somebody. Here's why. Here's what he says.
And Mr. Binger makes a big thing out of Kyle Rittenhouse was the only person who shot somebody that evening. True. Mr. Rittenhouse was the only person who was chased by Joseph Rosenbaum that evening. This is Joseph Rosenbaum.
PowerPoint. Look at the PowerPoint.
And what's important in this photograph is, one, it will allow you to identify him throughout the course of trial. Notice the belt, the baggy, lengthy jeans, and there will be a fair amount of testimony, I'm sure, regarding the maroon shirt. He's obviously currently wearing it.
Using that PowerPoint, using that clicker, and look at his little comfort level. Look at, he's kind of resting on the podium, just kind of hanging out there. Kind of a different demeanor with the jury. And a lot of this is thought about. A lot of this comes with just experience, but a lot of this is thought about. You might think he's just sort of, meandering around the courts. There are different rules about how you move around the court, and some judges will let you get off of that podium and walk a little bit further. Other judges kind of have got to touch the podium rule. So you can get out to the side of it, you can get out in front of it, you can certainly stand behind it, but the jury is on the other side of the podium. And so he wants to get out from behind the podium and connect with the jurors, get direct body language. And you can see, right, he's got a PowerPoint clicker right there. He is using the PowerPoint, using photographs, using visuals. He's not talking about Joseph Rosenbaum. He's showing you Joseph Rosenbaum, the guy in the red shirt. We're going to talk about the guy in the red shirt for the next 2 weeks here. So get used to it. And so very effective, very good, removing himself from in front of the podium, getting some good connection with the jury. Good stuff right there. And let's see, any other thoughts? No, that's what I had on that one. We also have here his movement. So I noticed this. He's walking back and forth a lot. He picks this back up. Here's Mark Richards.
Mr. Rosenbaum is wearing that maroon shirt on his face as a mask, covering up his identity, because he wants to steal my client's firearm and use it against him to carry out the threat he had made earlier. That isn't just the word of Kyle Rittenhouse made up after the fact. You'll hear the testimony of Richie McGinnis, who was close that evening. He was following behind them. You'll see him on the video. He'll testify to you in court. He did not feel endangered. He was doing his job. He will testify that Joseph Rosenbaum let out, as he put it, one of the scariest screams I ever heard, yelling, "Fuck you."
Whoa, content warning.
And dove for Kyle Rittenhouse's gun. Kyle Rittenhouse fires.
All right, Kyle Rittenhouse fires. So you see him moving around. You see him using some strong language there. Forgot to put a content warning note in my notes. Apologies at home. But it was muted, so hopefully if there were any little ones around, they didn't hear anything. But this is what happens in court, right? And he also used another word that is definitely not YouTube friendly. Starts with an N and ends with not good, civil disorder. So, he used that word in court today, and these words shock the jurors. They just kind of, whoa, what did he say? He say that? Dang. Okay, because it sort of shocks them out of their stupor of being a juror, and it connects them back with the scene. And so he actually used provocative language, walking back and forth, using PowerPoints, gives very colorful language about Kyle Rittenhouse fires, has to do it, fires. And I thought that was also compelling. Then we're going to give him the final word. This is where he's talking about, he closes us out here. This is Mark Richards talking about Rosenbaum. Final words.
House. The evidence will show he thought probably that he could get that gun from Kyle Rittenhouse. He was wrong. Kyle Rittenhouse protected himself, protected his firearm so it couldn't be taken, used against him or other people from Mr. Rosenbaum who'd made threats to kill, and the other individuals who didn't see that shooting attacked him in the street like an animal. Ladies and gentlemen, that's what the evidence will show. Thank you.
All right, so he closes it out, and then we jump back into our case in chief from the prosecution. And I was watching the chat as that was going by. Yes, people said, yes, the N-word, yes, it has the hard R at the end of it. Yeah, it was a hard R in court today. On the record in the court of law in Kenosha, Wisconsin. So you can see that this stuff certainly gets a little bit testy. Now, we have opening statements, right? We can compare and contrast the two. If we go back, we take a look at our Lanier's guide. We see here, well, what do we have here? Not overselling your case. I think he did pretty good with that. Looking for ways to change bad facts into good facts. I think the prosecution and the defense did good jobs of that. Let's see. So, for example, right, one of the bad facts may have been that he actually went back home to Illinois. And he said, well, he was there in the first place because his family is connected to Kenosha. Stuff like that. Mark Richards used PowerPoints. Certainly didn't seem like he was looking at notes, was sort of on the side of the podium. He, I don't think, oversold the case. Talked about the theme was really about protecting property, connecting it back to Kenosha. I think he used words the juror will understand, right? Shooting, glorious plain English, entertained the jury. I thought it was entertaining. He had visuals. He told a story. So I thought it was pretty good, pretty effective there from Mark Richards as well. And so those were the opening statements. Not a lot of time, right? About 20 minutes, maybe a piece, maybe 30 minutes a piece. And they went through it relatively quickly, and we covered most of it. There was still a lot in there that was worth it. If you didn't watch the full day, I'd watch the full day for sure. But that's sort of the meat and potatoes of the opening statements. And so once those happen, government goes first, defense goes out, gives their opening statement. Then it's time to get into the evidence. So the government calls their first witness. It's this guy, and he is a friend of Kyle Rittenhouse. His name is Dominic Black. And the way this works is the government comes out and asks questions first. So we're going to hear from Thomas Binger, who is sort of the litigator of the case. Jim Krause, the assisting attorney or the co-prosecutor or the assistant to the co-prosecutor, is sitting there next to him and helping provide some of the technical details. Objections here, reminder, go back and talk about that, and making sure that he kind of stays on track, whereas Thomas Binger is actually doing the litigating, doing the communicating, and sort of standing up and looking good and doing the wheeling and dealing in front of the jury. Jim is sort of just sitting there riding shotgun. So here then we have Dominic Black, and we learn about this guy. He's actually a friend with Kyle Rittenhouse, and it turns out that Dominic was actually with Kyle Rittenhouse on that night. They were part of the same crew. If you watch some of the video, a lot of it we covered here, where they're actually walking around, wandering around, sort of in a group, getting water bottles, going from corner to corner, interfacing with people. He was part of that crew. And the reason the government brings him out is because they want to put together and recreate what happened there, right? They need somebody to come and testify sort of from that perspective, because a lot of the officers all were there after the fact. They weren't sort of in this. So the only person who can really communicate about the inner workings of what happened is this guy. Now, Dominic is being charged with a crime by the same prosecutor. And the prosecutor actually brought that up at the close of his testimony today and said, I'm actually charging you with a crime, right? And you're sort of testifying here today kind of in exchange for that case, aren't you? He's like, yeah, I am. And so, right, this is a witness who is also being prosecuted and is being sort of, strongly urged to testify by his lawyer, saying, listen, man, if you don't testify here, I don't know what the plea deal is going to look like for you. So you got to come up there and just tell the truth. And so if you're a juror, if I'm a juror and I'm watching that happen, first thing I'm thinking is, oh, this is testimony under duress. This is somebody who is going to be, not honest, because they're trying to save their own butts, because if they don't testify appropriately, then maybe the prosecutor comes back and throws the book at them. And so the prosecution did actually disclose this, and the defense brought it up. It's not worth really spending a lot of time dissecting the video of it, but it is a point that I think is relevant. The jury is going to take a look at that and say, wait, you're being charged with a crime too? And the crime here is really for giving Kyle access to the gun, for knowingly giving somebody who's under the age of 18 access to the firearm. And so we get more of the story from Dominic Black. We also hear a lot from him actually identifying the gun, and there's a very interesting screenshot that is introduced as an exhibit in front of the jury that comes from Kyle Rittenhouse's TikTok, and so we're going to talk about that as well. Let's listen in. Here is Dominic Black talking about he saw Kyle Rittenhouse basically every day. Here he is.
I use that as a frame of reference. How long before that date had you known the defendant?
Roughly 9 months.
Was that the same period of time that you were dating his sister?
Yes.
And how frequently would you see the defendant during those 9 or so months?
About every day.
You mentioned there were times when you would go down to his residence in Antioch, is that right?
Yes.
Were there times when he would come to your stepfather's residence here in Kenosha?
Yes.
How often would that occur?
Weekly.
What sort of things did the two of you like to do together?
Everything as a kid. Hanging out, going to the lake, hunting, going up north, just everything you would do growing up.
Yeah, it's standard kid stuff. Nothing even out of the ordinary there. Prosecutor dives into this and says, well, what about hunting? And you guys have guns, and you hang out with guns, and you've both got guns, right? And you say, yeah, we got guns. And I went and I bought an AR-15, and Kyle Rittenhouse, he went and bought an AR-15. They're actually not AR-15s, but we're going to use that term because that's the term they're using here. And they got him together. Well, how did Kyle Rittenhouse get his? He's not 18. Well, I bought it for him, and I said I'd hang on to it until he turned 18. And we're going to keep it at my dad's house. He's got a safe. We got a ton of guns. All of that stuff. Right? We'll go through that whole narrative. Kyle Rittenhouse, maybe shouldn't have had access to it. He's under 17, is what this prosecutor is getting at. And then he really digs into this and says, well, we need you to identify this for us. And so they use Dominic Black to identify the murder weapon. Right? We have a murder weapon here. They're charging him with intentional homicide. We have a murder weapon. It's just like what you see in net. Where's the knife? Where'd they hide that knife? Oh, it's under the bed, on the third floor. They're identifying it. They're going to show that Kyle Rittenhouse has this is his gun. He's owned it. He's got pictures with it. And they're going to use this guy to make sure that they can get it in as an exhibit. Here is Dominic Black.
I believe that Detective Antaramian is holding up what is been marked as exhibit number 27. Detective, is that right? That's number 27? 27. Okay. Do you recognize that item, Mr. Black?
Yes.
What is that?
One of the AR-15s.
Do you know which one that is?
I believe it's Kyle's. I'm not too sure.
Okay. Would it be fair to say that yours and the defendant's look very similar to one another?
Yes.
Do you remember if there are any particular markings on one or the other that would help you to identify them?
The only difference was the sights.
What was the difference in the sights?
One of us had a bigger one. I don't remember which one it was.
Okay, fast forward through this. So he goes in. They have a problem with the sights. He's like, I can't tell that one or this one. So they go. They get the other gun. They come back out. He's like, nope, that's not my sight. That's my gun. Okay, so if that's my gun, that's Rittenhouse's gun. Here's that exchange.
The gun that we showed you, which is Exhibit 27 with the scope attached on it, was that your gun?
Yes.
Okay. So these two exhibits, 27 and 28, are 27 is the first one is your AR-15, and the second one is the defendant's. Is that correct?
Yes.
Your Honor, I'd move exhibits 27 and 28 into evidence.
No objection, Your Honor. Received.
Yeah, so no objection, move to admit it. It's all going into evidence, right? And so people are asking Free Appalachian over on Rumble saying, why so much time on the weapon? And it's because, right, it is the murder weapon. It is the gun that was actually used to shoot and kill somebody. And so they're trying to do two things. One, make sure that it is connected to Kyle Rittenhouse, but also showing that sort of he had access to this thing without lawful permission to some degree, that this was all done nefariously. And it helps, I think, if I can recall correctly, I think it was charge number count 4, count 6, I can't remember where it is, but we have the list of the charges. But there was one count, being in possession of a weapon under the age of 18. And for many, we've had a lot of arguments about this, but even in the jury instructions earlier this morning, having conversations about whether, any one of these charges can sort of puncture the protection of self-defense. In other words, if he was already in violation of the law for being somebody who's under the age of 18 with possession of an assault weapon, that was puncturing the safety of self-defense because he was already in violation of the law, right? You can't suddenly break the law. Like, you can't go in, rob a bank, and then say that the teller who shoots you is violating your self-defense or is assaulting you to some degree. So you can see that it's trying to sort of pierce that self-defense claim. If you're the bank robber, you don't get to claim self-defense because you broke the law. You don't get to claim that you're under threat because you broke it first. So I hope that makes sense to some degree. Now, and if that happens, then it might make self-defense inapplicable for the other more serious intentional charges. So it's a great question, and we're going to get into a lot of these. Monster One says self-defense. Yeah, we're going to get into all these questions here in a short minute, but good questions. I wanted to make sure while I see them, we get them addressed. Okay, so he identified the weapon, and now this is just amazing. So they are talking about this weapon because it is the murder weapon. Kyle Rittenhouse shouldn't have had it, according to this prosecutor, and we now see that Dominic Black is going to be identifying Rittenhouse holding this weapon even before the events took place on Kenosha. Here he is.
May I approach, Your Honor? Mr. Black, I'm going to show you a document which has been marked as Exhibit number 7. Do you recognize the photograph on that document?
Yes.
Who is shown in that photograph?
Kyle?
Was that a photograph that was taken when you and the defendant were up in Ladysmith around May 1st of 2020?
Yes.
Does that photograph show the defendant holding his AR-15?
Yes.
Your Honor, I'd move Exhibit number 7 into evidence.
Okay, here's this. Now watch this, baby.
Received. May I publish that to the jury, Your Honor, on the screens?
Publish it to the jury. Now here it comes. Screenshot from TikTok.
Sometimes these TVs... Could you turn that one on too, Natalie?
All right, so here's Kyle Rittenhouse's TikTok, and read this caption. Bruh, I'm just trying to be famous. Down here at the bottom. Bruh, I'm just trying to be famous. Kyle Rittenhouse, four-door...
Mr. Black, do you recall what day that photograph was taken when you were up there?
I want to say the same day we arrived.
Does that photograph show in the background there the property that your family had up in Ladysmith?
Yes.
Okay. And do you remember who it was who actually took that photograph?
Yes.
Who was it?
My friend Cody.
Do you remember if that was before or after you and the defendant went to the firing range and
This is before.
practiced? Okay. All right. Thank you.
So publishes that to the jury. 4 doors, more whores. Apparently that's Kyle Rittenhouse. Says, bruh, I'm just trying to be famous. And yeah, so that certainly came true under horrific circumstances. But yeah, they got that in as an exhibit, published it to the jury. So you don't really know what the jury's thinking when they see that. 4 doors, more horrors. Well, it sounds like a party, right? And now Kyle Rittenhouse is, bro, I'm just trying to be famous. So it kind of interesting, pretty funny, right? We've all been 17, 18. We've all done a lot of dumb things during those times. And, fortunately for many of us, social media wasn't around. So, those things, I don't know how much weight those carry with the jury. I just thought it was pretty funny that they got that published in there. So very interesting that got in. All right, let's see what else now. Also, prosecutor trying to really drive this home. Kyle Rittenhouse didn't have any permission to take that gun in the first place. And you can see, again, trying to sort of break the, Free Appellation is bringing up another point. Well, this is a misdemeanor. How can the misdemeanor gun charge sort of break the protection realm of the felony charges? And it's because the judge is really being very unclear about a lot of these rules. This goes back to the same jury instructions we talked about that the judge was hemming and hawing about earlier this morning. The defense was saying we should get self-defense jury instructions for all of these charges, and the judge just kind of said no. This was in the context of whether he should get the charge for the self-defense instruction for the reckless endangerment charge. Because theoretically, let's back this up for a quick minute. If Rittenhouse is justified in shooting Rosenbaum under a self-defense theory, Rosenbaum is chasing him around the corner, Rittenhouse turns, fires, Rosenbaum is dead. If the bullets now are whizzing past McGinnis, who's the reporter who's right behind Rosenbaum, and Rittenhouse was justified to use self-defense to fire those to protect him from the deadly harm of Rosenbaum, well, how is he not also protected by self-defense for firing near McGinnis? Doesn't the same self-defense protection that applies to the killing of Rosenbaum also extend to the action of just pulling the trigger on the gun and shooting the bullets, or not? Does the self-defense only apply to Rosenbaum, or does it also apply to McGinnis? Does it say that Rittenhouse was being so reasonable in his self-defense that anybody else, even an innocent bystander, if they get caught up in that activity of self-defense, that Rittenhouse is now immune from that? What if he would have shot and actually hit McGinnis or a family at a park? Would he be able to use self-defense and extend that over those other individuals? And so the judge is sort of having, we're having some debates about that. So we have conversations about self-defense, and you also have the problem here, if the jury instructions are not clear, free appellation, that you have the jury conflating the charges. Because Kyle Rittenhouse had a gun there illegally, and he shouldn't have had it, and he had no permission to have it, maybe everything that stems from possession of the gun, all the harm that follows, that cascades from having the gun, he's also responsible for that. So because he's guilty of one thing, he's guilty of the other. Batching all of these things up, which is kind of what the prosecution is trying to do, which is why the defense really wants very crystal clear self-defense instructions on every single one of the counts that we saw. So it's a little bit unclear, but it's a great question. So here now is Dominic Black talking about Kyle Rittenhouse not having any permission at all to take the gun.
On the day of August 25th, 2020, the day when all this stuff happened, did he possess that gun?
Yes.
How did it come to be that he gained possession of that gun on August 25th?
My dad had took a lot of the weapons we had out of the safe due to all the rioting and stashed them inside the house in case somebody were to come break into our house. And that gun happened to be one of those weapons.
Do you know how the defendant took possession of it that day?
I do not. All I'm aware of is that it was downstairs.
When did you first see the defendant with that weapon that day?
When I was in the kitchen. So about, I want to say, a few hours before we left.
And tell us what you saw when you were in the kitchen.
I saw him coming up the stairs with it.
With the AR-15?
Yes.
Did you hear him ask you permission to take that gun?
No.
Did you hear him ask permission from your father?
No.
All right, so no permission. Kyle Rittenhouse is a bad person. Got it. So now what he's saying here This is where things start to go askew to some degree for the prosecution here. I don't think that any of this testimony from Dominic Black continued to help the prosecutor any further, honestly. I think that all this testimony was mostly bad. And got to remember this, right? He is somebody who is part of the Rittenhouse crew. They've been friends for a long time. We're going to hear during cross-examination, Mark Richards comes out and says, you guys called yourself brothers, didn't you? Yeah. So you actually have sort of a government witness who's actually really sympathetic to Kyle Rittenhouse, presumably, who is being more or less coerced into testifying because the government is coercing him because he's being charged with a very similar crime for giving Kyle Rittenhouse a gun in the first place. So his attorney is in the courtroom saying, yeah, you better go testify. Just go be honest about all this stuff. Let us know what your perspective is. Tell the truth. And they've told us this is the prosecution's witness. They made this decision. They said, we want him to testify. We think he's going to help our case more than he's going to hurt our case. And so they're gambling with this to some degree. Remember, they're also having to recall the fact that he is of the same mindset as Kyle Rittenhouse. Somebody, presumably has a lot of comfort with firearms. Father obviously uses them. They go hunting. They're very familiar with these things. He buys them. Got one for Rittenhouse. They saw what they saw happening in Kenosha together, and they both made the decision to go over there and try to revert what was happening. So he's sympathetic. Kyle Rittenhouse, the same perspective that Kyle Rittenhouse has, I'm sure, as we're going to hear, is shared by Dominic Black. Kyle Rittenhouse saw danger and violence and threats and looting and rioters and burning. Do you think this guy is like, pro BLM? He's going to be a witness here on the stand, and he's going to say, yeah, Mr. Prosecutor, in fact, you're right. I can't believe what he was doing there. This is ridiculous. Why was Rittenhouse there in the first place? And he brought a gun? Well, that's ridiculous. By the way, I support, true Second Amendment reforms here because guns kill people. Well, he's not going to ever come out and say that. So the prosecution is playing a very interesting gamble to some degree. This is somebody who is testifying more or less under duress, but who's a friend of Kyle Rittenhouse, who's being used to prove a very particular point here. Kyle Rittenhouse was, owner of the gun, possessor of the gun unlawfully. It was, he gained possession of it through this weird concoction of him buying it and then storing it at his house and never had permission to take it in the first place. Yada, yada, yada. Got all that. But then for some weird reason, he starts going into asking about his assessment of the situation on the ground. Prosecutor Binger says, Dominic, so tell me, what's your perspective? What did you see on the ground? What was the condition like out there? Was it a mostly peaceful protest? Here's what he says.
You talked about not wanting to be on the ground because of your concern about things happening on the ground. Did you feel that if you stayed on the ground, you would be in greater danger?
Yes.
Why was that?
People could easily get access to hurting me or coming up closer to me.
When you say people, what are you worried about?
Anyone rioting, anybody that was there for the wrong intentions.
So what got it in your mind that night that you felt there would be people out on the street that would want to hurt you if you were down on the ground?
I had heard about the previous night and how it was, and I knew that there was a lot of people fighting each other and a lot of violence. So I felt it would be best that I went there, if I was going to go there, making sure that I could protect myself if I needed to.
But you were also there to protect the car source location.
Yes.
How were you going to do that from up on the roof?
I'm helping anybody else that was there. I'm spotting people that were throwing.
Okay, so you can see how this kind of goes a little bit squirrely for Prosecutor Binger. He says, what's the situation there on the ground? What are you thinking? He says, well, people can hurt you on the ground. That's why we were on the roof. Oh, well, people could hurt you there? Yeah, rioters were there. He actually uses that word. Yeah, they were rioting. Yeah, there were other people out there rioting. And it did appear to be like there was a lot of violence out there. People were fighting each other. It was sort of madness, which is why I went on the roof. Because it was so dangerous, Mr. Prosecutor. And so sort of supports a self-defense argument, doesn't it? That if somebody were in fact on the ground because of the rioters and because it was so dangerous and it was so violent, according to your own witness, Mr. Prosecutor, sounds like somebody who finds himself in a tricky situation down there might be pretty well justified to use self-defense. Just saying, just a thought. if it really is in fact violent, according to your own witness. So he carries on with that. Binger says, well, okay, so if it was so violent, did anybody else have guns over there? And Dominic Black says, yeah, everybody did. Every single person did. That's how bad it was. And then wait for this long pause. You can always tell when an attorney doesn't like an answer when there's this just long pause. And I'm going to let this puppy play. We're going to just let it sit here for a minute. Here is Prosecutor Binger asking about, did anybody else, outside of this lunatic Kyle Rittenhouse, this lunatic, reckless person, he was the only guy with firearms there, wasn't he, Dominic?
Were there others in your group at 59th Street Car Source besides the defendant who were similarly armed?
Yes.
How many?
Everybody except for one person.
And when you say everybody, how many people are we talking about?
6 or 7.
So it's fair to say that there were, other than you and the defendant, there were another 6 or 7 people that were all carrying AR-15 type weapons.
Yes.
Long pause. Still going.
When you were...
So did anybody else have AR-15s? Yeah, every single person except one person did. Oh. Well. Well, I guess my argument that Kyle Rittenhouse was acting like a reckless lunatic kind of gets deflated a little bit. Goes down because everybody else had guns. Well, so I guess Kyle Rittenhouse was sort of acting in conformity with what a lot of other people who were also reasonable, who also didn't shoot anybody, he was doing what they were doing. But they didn't get attacked. Kyle Rittenhouse did, which is what caused the aberration. So in fact, he wasn't reckless at all, was he? He was actually doing exactly what was prudent and reasonable under the circumstances. So little bit off there when you are trying to make Kyle Rittenhouse look like a murdering maniac, somebody who was out there running around with a rifle, because nobody was doing that. It was a mostly peaceful protest. He just ends up executing people randomly, and he was the only person out there doing it. Not the case at all. Very violent. People were on the roof. Everybody had AR-15s. It was madness. Yeah, so, okay, that's one way to approach a trial, I guess. And we have another claim here. Oh, here's just another quick clip about violence.
When you were up on the roof that night, what observations, if any, did you make about the crowd and what was going on the ground?
There's a lot of violence, a lot of screaming, a lot of people throwing things.
Yep.
You could definitely tell that people weren't just there for the reason they were. It wasn't a safe place to be at all.
Wasn't a safe place to be at all. Wasn't a safe place to be at all. Government's witness. Yeah, wasn't a safe place to be at all. Now, he's going to flip this around, right? And he's going to say, well, exactly. That's why Kyle Rittenhouse shouldn't have been there in the first place with a stolen gun, more or less. Or he shouldn't have ever been allowed to be there at all. Guess what? He was there, though, and it wasn't illegal to be there. And he got attacked, and so he used self-defense. Is going to be how the defense deals with this, as we're going to hear in a minute. But in addition to that, right, in addition to Kyle Rittenhouse being somebody who was in a very violent, dangerous situation, people lobbing, throwing things, people going on the rooftops because it was in fact so dangerous, when all of this madness, this urban warfare is taking place on the streets of Kenosha, what does this murdering lunatic Kyle Rittenhouse do? Oh, he just goes out and actually provides medical assistance to somebody who needs it.
Okay. What, if anything, did you observe the defendant doing during that time?
I noticed that as soon as they did get to us, there was somebody that was hurt, and he went and helped them and brought them back into the building. And then as soon as they were all bandaged up, he brought them out.
Do you know what sort of injury they had suffered?
I do not.
And when you say you saw them go into the building, did you actually see with your own eyes them enter the building?
Yes.
Okay. And the supplies that the defendant had in his medic bag or something, did those all come from your...
Kyle Rittenhouse is a medic. He's providing assistance to people in medical need from the government's own witness in front of the jury. So not only was it a dangerous war zone, Kyle Rittenhouse is running into it to go and rescue somebody who needed medical attention. That's the prosecutor. That's their witness. Okay, so let's take a look now at the cross-examination.
You remember about that
what is this
time period that we now know was the time of the shootings?
Yeah, so we have another clip here. Let's play this one. This is Dominic Black sort of telling us what he actually saw about the shooting. I know this segment is a lot of clips, but I want to make sure we get this straight because a lot of good detail here. This is information about the car source sort of activity. So remember, car source was where the initial sort of running around was happening. Rosenbaum was chasing Kyle Rittenhouse. He sort of goes dark into the shadows and then emerges back out there shortly after. And here is Dominic Black telling us what he saw about that entire exchange. Here he is.
That one of us had received information that one of the car source dealerships was being vandalized or people are trying to burn it down. Kyle was not able to make it back to us, our location, so either me or Nick called him and told him about what was happening, and then the last I saw of him was him running towards that direction. And then from then on, I just heard gunshots.
Now,
okay, so he really didn't hear much of anything, or see much of anything, right? He saw sort of him go into that area, something happened, heard gunshots, saw Kyle coming back out, and this is where he picks back up. This is now where I think this is our last testimony on direct exam, but this is what the prosecutor is sort of asking about, where he's asking about the reconnection. Dominic Black then reconnects with Kyle Rittenhouse. Rittenhouse obviously just, fired his weapon multiple times, hit several people, presumably dead, and now he is reconnecting with Dominic Black. Prosecutor says, what did you see? What did Kyle Rittenhouse look like? And I want to show you something that's pretty dishonest that this prosecutor does. I think we have it here in this clip, but the prosecutor just finishes hearing a full statement from Dominic Black. Dominic Black says, when Kyle Rittenhouse came upon us, he said that he had to do it. He said that this was done out of self-defense. He said these people were trying to hurt him. And then right after that, the prosecutor starts digging in on him. Yeah, but here it is.
Gunshots. What is the next thing you remember about the defendant after that?
I didn't believe the gunshots were actually his until I got a phone call. And I answered it, and he just said, I shot somebody, and then hung up right away.
When did you see him next after that?
I want to say just a few minutes right after that.
Was that back at 59th Street?
Yeah, that was at the original location.
What observations, if any, did you make about the defendant when you saw him?
He was freaking out. He was really scared. He was pale, sweating a lot. You could tell he was just scared.
Did he say anything?
He wasn't really talking. He just said he had to do it. It was self-defense. People are trying to hurt him.
There it is.
Did he ever say to you that someone was trying to attack him with a gun?
No.
Did he ever say to you that someone was trying to attack him with a knife?
No.
Did he ever say to you that anyone was trying to attack him with any sort of weapon?
No.
What happened after that?
Did you hear what that prosecutor just did? He just got done listening to Dominic's testify. I heard him say a couple things. Said he had to do it. He just said that. It was self-defense and people were trying to hurt him. That was literally the three things he said before the prosecutor dove back in at him and said, did he ever tell you that they were going to attack him with a gun? No, he didn't. How about a knife? No, they didn't. How about anything else? Any type of weapon? No, they didn't. What's the point of that? They also didn't try to attack him with a bazooka or a flamethrower or a machete or a chainsaw or an axe. None of those things. But they didn't sit down and have a conversation about this. Rittenhouse was running back and puts his hands up, as we're going to hear, during cross-examination to try to reach out to a police officer. But they didn't have a chance to sit down with Dominic and said, my goodness. Did you see that Gage Grosskreutz? He had a 9mm Glock in his hand. Boy, I'm glad I shot him right in the elbow to make sure that he wasn't able to pull the trigger against me. What did you do this last 30 seconds? 90 seconds. They didn't have conversations about it. But the prosecutor is doing that, that repetition thing, the threes. A gun? No. A knife? No. Any other weapon? No. Okay. So that means that he wasn't under threat, I guess, although it doesn't. Because although Kyle Rittenhouse didn't say those things, it doesn't mean that that wasn't his perception. But he's going to try to make that argument. Kyle Rittenhouse didn't say that I was being attacked with a weapon. All he did was just shoot somebody. Okay, so let's take a look at the cross-exam now. This is Mark Richards. Just a couple of these. Mark Richards, I think, did something smart. He didn't overcross this person too much. I think he did a little bit. I think that he sort of got into some questions that weren't relevant. This was really a very good witness for the defense. We heard that it was a violent scene, that Kyle Rittenhouse is a medic who is out there helping people in the middle of a war zone in Kenosha. So it's pretty good witness as far as I can tell. But then we have, this is Mark Richards asking about this, a little bit of background here, and then we're going to jump into the more substantive stuff. Here's Mark Richards starting off on the cross-exam.
You knew Kyle Rittenhouse through his sister, Mackenzie.
Yes.
And when you were 18, 19, you were dating Mackenzie.
Yes.
And you and Kyle were good friends.
Yes.
And you referred to each other as brothers.
Yes.
Okay. And you talked about Kyle.
Okay, so just a little bit there, right? Call yourself brothers. You sort of are, part of the same crew, and so on and so forth. Here, we're seeing that they're going back to this theme. I've got two final clips of cross-exam. Then we're going to jump into questions. We'll go through these quickly so we can make sure we get to some questions. But here is Mark Richards talking about property again and saying that you really couldn't see what happened to Kyle. So you really can't talk about self-defense, more or less. Here that is.
The whole idea was to send Kyle down to Car Source 3, the 63rd Street Car Source, because you guys had received a report that the people who were supposed to be protecting it had left, correct?
Yes.
And the property was being destroyed.
Yes.
You didn't know that Kyle had been separated from Mr. Balch at that point.
I did not.
So you tell him to go down there and protect that property because the cars are being bashed in, correct?
Yes.
It was either you or Nick Smith.
Yes.
And from where you were, you could see Kyle going down in that direction.
Yes.
And it wasn't the second he goes down there you hear shots. He goes out of your view, there's a fairly lengthy period of time, you hear a gunshot, and then you hear a series of more gunshots, correct?
Yes.
And you, from where you were, could not see what happened to Kyle at the second incident, correct?
Yes.
Did not see.
I did not see.
Did not see, couldn't see anything of what really happened there, but did see Kyle when he reconnected with the police at the end of the night, or at least attempted to. And so this is where Mark Richards gets him to reiterate that Kyle Rittenhouse, as soon as this was over, okay, he wasn't running back to Illinois like partying, go like Thomas Binger and the prosecution would have you believe. He wasn't doing cartwheels down the street, reconnecting with his, MAGA insurrectionists. He actually did approach law enforcement and tried to turn himself in and get some help. Here is the government's own witness confirming that.
And eventually, Kyle comes back in to your vision, correct?
Yes.
What did you observe Kyle doing as he approached? Well, let me ask you this. Where was he first?
Where I first saw him was kind of against a tree line. It was more in front of the Ultimate gas station. And I saw him walking with his gun hanging down and he had his hands up. And then I watched him walk up to a police car and then step away.
Okay.
And then...
Describe what he's doing as he's going up to that police car.
I can't hear anything, but I could tell he was yelling.
Okay.
I don't know what he was yelling.
Where
but,
were his hands?
In the air.
Okay. And you saw him walk up to the police car.
Yes.
You don't hear anything, but does Kyle stay and go up to the car?
Yes, he does. Right. We saw that. We saw a lot of the videos of Kyle. Hey, I'm here. And cars were just sort of driving, police cars were driving right back through him. And so that's what we had today for testimony. After Dominic Black wrapped up, they recessed for the day. We'll be back tomorrow with a lot more trial. Today, we went pretty deep on this. I don't intend to go this deep on every particular day, but we got to see some very interesting themes flesh themselves out. We got to see where the prosecution was going with things, how the defense was going with things with their openings. We see the narratives shooting up, sort of a recklessness, somebody who should have been there in the first place, somebody that had guns unlawfully, violating all sorts of permission in order to get this thing, and was sort of reckless and cold in the killing. Defense saying, not at all, right? This was somebody who was there to help, somebody who was a medic, somebody who was protecting other people, who wanted to protect property, and was thrown in the middle of a violent situation, not of his own making. That this was a situation that was percolating throughout society in Kenosha that night. And Kyle Rittenhouse was caught in a bad situation with somebody who was chased down by Rosenbaum, had to exercise self-defense, did so. Unfortunately, people died. But we got to see a lot from these attorneys in terms of their style, how they are communicating with the jury, and there's going to be a lot more witnesses. We're going to hear a lot less from the attorneys as we hear more, questions from witnesses, and we'll continue to cover them. So make sure you're subscribed here or wherever you're watching us, following us, wherever this happens to be your home base. And so let's take a look at some questions now from our friends, our home base at watchingthewatchers.locals.com. And it is Tuesday, and so I've got a short time frame today. Got a hard stop here soon, and so we're going to fly through questions. Just Cows says, free my man, he ain't even do nothing. That's from Just Cows in the house. Good to see you, Just. We have News Now Wyoming says, have to hand it to the feds. Paper trail is always a pain in the butt, but their courts are efficient. Jury selection, day 1, day 2 opening statements, and day 2, 2.5 witnesses. So this is actually state court, right? So it's just a different style of doing jury selection. Yeah, it is different. And we'll see how it works out for him. News Now says, spent the day watching the trial, then various channels talking about it. So weird when any of them have someone try to make an argument in favor of Rittenhouse and suddenly run out of time while the guy is in the middle of his statement. Okay, so a lot of people are talking about it, I'm sure. Very interesting case. Hopefully you're seeing some good content out there. Monster1 says, Rob, did you get a chance to watch the video I sent you? Here's the link again. You didn't get the message yet. Short video showing how the shooting started. You clearly see Rosenbaum being the aggressor. So I probably have seen it, Monster1. I can't pin it. Oh, yeah, this one just came out, right? This one came out. Charlie Kirk was playing it. And I think Human Events was playing it. I have not actually watched that one, but I've seen so many different angles. I saw Rittenhouse from day one. I thought that he was being chased. Somebody fired off a gun behind him as he was running down the road. But I have that queued up, so I'll take a look. Former LEO says, I sent you a long comment this morning. Take a look. We'll do former LEO. We did an impromptu 22-minute stream this morning over on Locals. News Now Wyoming says, I have forgotten about the videos involving in this case. Watching the video before the shots today, it still amazes me how many little kids were there for violent protests. Seriously? Is this take your kids to terrorism day? To take your kids to insurrection day or burn down the 3rd precinct day? Lavoisier says, hey Rob, sorry been gone for a while. I was abducted by aliens. Welcome back. Still been following along the whole time though. Been able to stream your show from the mothership. That's good news. Love your coverage of the Rittenhouse trial. Also, glad to hear your voice is coming back. Your big, beautiful spotlights are getting much stronger. Really good to see you, Lavoisier. I appreciate you being here. I miss you guys when you leave. It's come back. I'm like, I remember that name. I remember that person. And here they are. Hopefully you got some good technology. Maybe you have what do they call it? No rectal probes, though. Hopefully you had a good trip. Former LEO says, I've been involved in many trials that were complicated and involved violence, but without a doubt, this is the worst defense opening statement I've ever observed or involved with. Defense attorney was unprepared, did more to confuse the jury rather than setting out the facts and his defense strategy. If the defense continues this directions, it would be grounds for appeal, he says, due to inadequate legal defense. I can see why he cut Barnes and experts loose. He's the wrong defense attorney for Rittenhouse, completely past his competency level. This is a self-defense trial. All he has done is overload and confuse the jury with his opening. Sounds like a rookie. I'm sure that he will make many more errors in defending Rittenhouse. Perspective here from former LEO in the House. Probably been a part of a lot of trials, seen a lot of defense attorneys. It's a good perspective, former LEO. I think that there are probably people who agree with you. I don't think that it was a slam dunk opening. I don't think it was the worst thing I've ever seen. I think he hit some good marks, and I think it was lacking in some other marks. There were some errors, some things that I thought were interesting, that he didn't have sort of some punchy statements and some punchy words at any given moment, but more or less I thought it Yeah, I thought it was fine. Thunder7 says, I watched Black's testimony. I understand your disdain for prosecutors now. Binger was arrogant with the witness, almost reaching fever pitch smarminess when Black mentioned he and his family enjoy hunting. And when he mentioned that Kyle was interested, I thought that Binger was going to run away in disgust. Grow up. I would never hunt, but I don't judge others. And Black came across as a very responsible young man with guns. Kyle, too. I think this witness was good for the defense. What say you, Rob? I agree. Yeah, you probably submitted that before I jumped into my full explanation. But I agree with you. I think he was a stronger witness for the defense than for the government. Kyle Rittenhouse was in a dangerous situation, and he was providing medical care to people out there. Jeremy Matrita says, Rob, this prosecutor definitely went to the school of deception and lies. Kyle shot in self-defense and then immediately rendered aid. There is a clear video of Kyle acting in an honorable way. I can see why you made the decision to defend people rather than ruin their lives with lies. I'm getting some love today. I appreciate it. Thomas Binger is doing more for the defense community than I could ever dream. Thanks, Thomas. Yeah, people can see right through it. C. Rose says, Rob, I thought Binger really dropped the ball when trying to weave the facts of the case together. You like that Miss Grosskreutz bladed his body stuff? Yeah, and so, yes, C. Rose. So, look, here's the thing. Some stuff that might seem obvious to people is really not obvious to lawyers, okay? You know, some lawyers, you have to remember, are highly educated people who have read too many books that their brains are short-circuited a little bit, okay? What you saw out of Thomas Binger was actually pretty good. Many attorneys, even though you're used to seeing Harvey Specter on Suits or Matthew McConaughey in The Lincoln Lawyer, right? A lot of lawyers, they went to law school. They didn't go to public speaking school. And so you have actually a pretty decent attorney in Thomas Binger for a prosecutor, okay? That's why he's doing the trial, and Jim Krause, who's sitting to his right, is not. So, yes, it's good for prosecution standards. Let me just leave it at that. And there are good prosecutors out there, but it is good for prosecution standards. We'll just leave it there. Because the alternative, C. Rose, is you have a prosecutor that comes out and says, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the evidence will show you that Kyle Rittenhouse did X, Y, and Z, and they don't even move off the podium. They don't get animated at all. They don't articulate or modulate their voice. They just get really cold and stuffy, and I've seen it. So at least he's moving. Not bad. All right, good to see you. And a couple others. We got a few more minutes. News Now says, the reasonableness of this case is the most important. Do you think the average juror could come to the conclusion that, one, Rittenhouse was in reasonable fear of his life with all victims, and that, two, other than the first victim, everyone else was trying to stop who they thought was an active shooter, so it was reasonable for them as well? So could an average juror come to the decision that both sides are reasonable, thus a not guilty verdict, or is 2021 a all or nothing kind of decision? It's a good question, News Now. It's going to be up for the jury. We're going to see what they have to say about it. And it's been kind of an all or nothing year, hasn't it? We'll see. We have Kincaid says, good evening, Rob and all. Did it not seem like Thomas was playing for the other team? Facts appeared to be one-sided. Am I missing something? Is there a sucker punch coming? The weapon possession seems to be the only genuine concern here, unless there's an attempt to say that Kyle, a citizen, should not have the right to protect. Also, yesterday, Alec was very defensive and fearful. Dollars to donuts, he had a piece under his coat, front left. That's from Kincaid. On the Alec comment, that's amazing. No, this whole case is like that. The whole case, as we've been following it, it's like, why are they charging this kid in the first place? Should have never happened. Another one, LT13 says, I thought he was saying that Kyle is going to testify, but I think they're going to show that the video of Kyle talking to either McGinnis or Schaefer, saying that he was there to help people and provide first aid. Also, the defense guy dropped the hard R. I know. Everybody's ears went, what? What did you say? I don't think you can, that's illegal. Arrest that man. So, yeah, curious. Monster One says, how about the 70-year-old guy who got cracked over the head? Okay, he didn't die, but is that really the bar you want to set? It's okay to assault people. We have Bill Given says, if Gage Grosskreutz had the gun arm back in position Mr. Binger had claimed, there would be no way that he could have been shot in the bicep. The bullet would have had to go through his chest to shoot him there. Good observation, Bill Givens. It was right here, sort of in the chunk of the elbow. Be Brave says, I hate the PA's 70s styles mustache. Shouldn't matter, but unfortunately stuff like that matters to the jury, whether it's conscious or subconscious. But hey, I'm sure others love it. And the faux hawk too, on top of it. But we're not making fun of his personality. Rational Gaze says, have you seen the video of Antifa showing up on Kenosha August 24? They're carrying AR-15s, antagonizing the police, and purposely escalating the protest into a riot. A lot of that was taking place last year. Thunder7 says, seen a lot of videos. It's a tragedy. Very clear Kyle's defending himself. Even forgetting these rioters started a dumpster fire and had violent criminal records, Kyle is the innocent victim. I think there's going to be a civil war if he's convicted. People have had enough of this bias against white people, especially those who stand up to the lunatic left and Antifa thugs. I think it's just not just white people. I think it's just in general. People are tired of this garbage all across the country. Soul Viking says, although I don't think it will work, trying to reframe Kyle's lack of aid rendering is an interesting strategy. In the middle of the sequential events, aid to those assaulting was the last thing that would have been reasonable. I agree with you, Soul Viking. I'm not sure what he's expecting there. Nadarb says, no. Major disrespect to prosecutors. How do these people sleep at night, especially this Binger guy? Though I was surprised at how soft he went on to Rittenhouse during opening, so give him a -5 out of 10 approval out of a -10. That's from Nadarb. Vientika says, if I were listening to this for the first time just based on the prosecution's opening statement, I would think to myself that all the defense would have to do is say that Kyle was doing his part to protect property and the prosecution arguments would have meant nothing. Also, is it just me? Or does the defense attorney sound somewhat like Jesse Ventura? He kind of does. Yeah, he certainly does. He's got that really sort of, hard delivery. Spawn Dog says, Rob, do you think he'll take the stand? I think the jury would love to hear it out of Kyle's mouth. He can convey his own fear, his own life in his own words. He could, but I don't think he should. I don't think that he would take the stand. I don't think there's a need for it at all. Antifa says, peaceful shootings and mostly peaceful protests. We might try to burn down the courthouse in a peaceful protest if the jury doesn't do what we want. Kamala is already ready to bail us out. Antifa's here. Let's see. Huge, long comment here. I'm going to save this one. We'll save this one for tomorrow if I can get to it, because it's a big comment about some good stuff. And I want to make sure that we are saving some of these, but I'm running out of time, so I cannot get to that one right now. Quick additional couple. We'll fly through a couple of these. Miss Lucky says, hey, Rob, Judge didn't look too interested in Binger's intro. Looks like he was more interested in something on his desk. Are the intros not that important to the judge? The opening statements, the opening arguments they're important, but they're critically important. But in terms of a judge's involvement, not really. They're listening for objections, but those don't come often. Monster One says, I don't like this defense guy either. Don't like his flow. That's from Mark Richards. And we've got Kincaid says, the ADA lied about the footage and the other facts during the opening. How is that not called out for what it is? As a lawyer, is it bad form to be so blunt? It is. It is bad form to overpromise and to sort of make conclusions in the law that aren't supported by the facts. And so those, my friends, are all the time that's all the time that we've got for today on the show, because I've got to jump. It's Tuesday, and we know that on Tuesdays we got a little bit shorter shows, but we wanted to make sure we spent a lot of time here talking about the Rittenhouse case, and we did. We took a deep dive. Tomorrow, we'll get back to our normal routine, try our best to squeeze in 3 segments, depending on how the other witnesses look in the Rittenhouse case. And so I hope you join us. Quick welcome to some new people. Bad Guy 24, Cece signed up. Very clever name. Also, Mind Magician, C. Rose, Hyperspectral, Aaron Caroline, Dave 520, Donna B, Roy Bott, Ronnie Cole, French Toast, The AI Guy, Martini Junkie, Jess Cows, and a Cold Painter, all signed up over at watchingthewatchers.locals.com. Saturday, November 6th, this Saturday, we've got an event coming up. Come join us at watchingthewatchers.locals.com. That, my friends, is it for me. Everybody have a tremendous evening. Come join us on Locals at 4 p.m. Arizona time for the recording of this broadcast. Have a tremendous evening, my friends. Sleep very well. I'll see you right back here tomorrow. Bye-bye.